You may not have realized it, but from the moment you hit play on this podcast, you entered a relationship. It's a relationship that is unfolding. It's a relationship that could be quite short. You could hit pause or stop at any moment. You could tell yourself you're going to come back to this and never return. But it's also a relationship that could be fruitful and last for many episodes. A relationship where you could begin to get to know the two of us, your podcast's hosts, David and Eric, today and on an ongoing basis. And as you got to know us, you could get to know parts of yourself, some more known, others more unknown. But together, as we all embark on this journey, we're here to talk about the transforming power of relationship. And you'll notice that pause in transforming, because relationships transform, but relationships are also the crucible from which trance forms. Trance is hypnotic, but what people often don't know is that what hypnosis is in a nutshell is attention. Trance is attention, and relationships are the origin of paying attention. We learn to pay attention to ourselves and to the world by how we pay attention to our caregivers, our attachment figures, and how they give attention to us. And with that, David, my attention turns to you.
Beautiful handoff. Thank you very much, Eric. I want to welcome everybody to Trance-forming Relationships. Eric and I are the co-hosts of this podcast about the nature of relationships. As you'll hear, as you listen in and learn with us and through us, relationships are the fundamental dimension of us as social creatures. Everything exists only in relationship to other things. Through this podcast, we'll talk about your relationship to different parts of yourself. That's a big issue for us because many of the people that we see are struggling with different parts of themselves that are in physical pain, psychological pain, relationship pain. People who are struggling in relationships with their larger community or the larger world. Over the last few years, we've seen a coming apart of relationships, a polarizing force that for many people literally feels as if they're being torn apart from the foundations that were so familiar and gave them a sense of stability, security, and safety. So yes, in this podcast, through this podcast, we're going to be talking about many different parameters or facets of the idea of relationship and how that intersects with the world of hypnosis and specifically the world of trance. The kind of trance we live in that is positively transformative, and unfortunately the kind of negative trance that holds many of us as prisoners in a way of living where we're living out less than we're capable of being. We hope through this podcast you'll discover some interesting, important, accessible, and practical ways to liberate yourself. To liberate yourself in your relationship with yourself and in your relationship with others in your life. So relationships come in many different shapes and forms. They can be positively transformative. They can be healing in quite profound ways. they can also be incredibly damaging. Relationships can be a way that imprisons us in stories about ourselves that limit who we can be and what we're able to free ourselves up to be in the best sense of the word. And Eric, I'd like to ask you, from the relationship perspective, talk a little bit about this idea of where relationships can be liberating or imprisoning. And what is that about?
That's such a good question, David. And it distills down to the sense that we all, whether we are aware of it or whether it's happening in the background, are looking for mirrors. We're looking to have people, groups, institutions, objects reflect back to us a version of ourselves that we want to see, that we want to relate with, that we want to know ourselves to be. You know, sometimes the problem is that we're too rigid in what that reflection can be. I need you to relate to me in this way. You know, I need you to see me as strong and virile, or I need to have you see me as attractive, or I need to have you see me as smart. But we're all looking for something. And sometimes, again, it's a really conscious process. You know, I need you to see me this way. And sometimes we don't know what we're looking for. And I think that that's the promise, but it's also the seduction of all of these types of relationships that we're going to talk about on our show. And let's take some examples for a moment, if we could. So, you know, and I'm going to just throw out some labels here, when a quote unquote liberal or progressive is seduced by the story that the world is being ruined by rich plutocrats, that the billionaire class controls the world. In a certain respect, they're trying to find an explanation for the world that they see around themselves and the world that they feel. And if you go a step further, they're trying to find, in a sense of community, other people who they feel like get them and relate to them. And you know, you could totally invert that. You could say, well, you know, maybe you're somebody who's a quote unquote conservative and you feel like, you know, the world is being tarnished by the woke agenda, right? And that there's a powerful group of university academics that are controlling and restricting the way that people think, and that they don't allow a diversity of viewpoints. And again, you know, if you step back from the content of these descriptions, the processes are remarkably similar. People are looking for a story that explains the world, and more importantly, a story that explains their place in the world. And they're looking for a mirror in the people they encounter that can give themselves back as the way that they want to be known. So, at its core, relationships are about a story or a set of stories. And I wonder if that's something that you could speak about, David, this idea of trance as narrative.
If if we think about a trance as a state in which something feels different, solid, reliable, a positive trance is one where we can shift from the story that we've lived in into a different story that feels positive, solid, predictable, but in a whole different way of being. That's called healing. Unfortunately, story can also be trapping. So think about the idea that at one level, depression is a story that a person lives into, a story that they live through, that they don't belong, that they don't deserve, that their worth is not attainable. They feel disconnected from others. And down the rabbit hole of depression they go. A story about panic and general anxiety. The story that I can't keep the future from coming closer and closer, and it's going to be bad. It's going to take me down. The story about the failure of a relationship that years ago I entered into with the promise, till death do us part. And now I'm feeling that the story is suffocating me. It's literally suffocating me to an emotional death. I can't wait for this relationship to part. It's lost all its promise. I'm not minimizing those as not real. What Eric and I are going to talk about is that at important levels, each of those involves a narrative, a story that we consciously, but especially non-consciously maintain, that structures, organizes, habituates us to live our day-to-day lives according to that self-limiting narrative. And through this podcast, through really learning to understand what trance is, what it looks like, and what it feels like, to discover your ability to rise above the limitations of that story and begin to access positive possibilities that exist within you but have not yet been realized. I'll give a concrete example from my own life experience of a story. My father, who has now been gone about 9 years, was quite a renowned physician, a researcher, an academic, a neurologist. He was always someone who, in many ways, was larger than life. And yet, later in life, he began to lose his sharp edges, the edges of his sharp mind, because he was descending into dementia. He was descending into Alzheimer's disease, which eventually took his life, to the point that he fell out of the story of his own life. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know who his wife of 63 years was. He didn't know who his children, including me, were anymore. It was a very powerful example to me of how, unless we are living in and through a story we share with someone else and that they share with us, the nature of that relationship is very ambiguous. He was no longer who he was. We want to help you find how to live in a vibrant and vital way through a healthy and growth-inducing story about yourself, your place in your world, your place in your life. Eric, maybe you can pick up on this idea of how you, as a psychologist, and then we can take a few minutes and talk about who we actually are, two psychologists, but where you as a psychologist have found yourself utilizing trance, hypnotic process, story to help people break into new and different healing relationships.
Well, I mean, I just felt like I was right there with you as you were sharing that story about your father. And the immediate question that came to my mind, which you might choose to answer or might not, is what it was like for you to find yourself being written out of his current experience of his life and of his narrative. And I'll share a story from my own life that I think speaks to this. You know, my grandmother growing up, she was just a presence, a figure in New York City. And she had this apartment that, I have so many childhood memories from. And it wasn't just going to visit her, it was this whole expectation of the experience in her apartment, the way the books were situated on her bookshelf, the TV, and this is, the old school TV that was in the middle of the room, this beautiful piano in the corner of the room that my father used to play as a child. Um, I guess it would be like the hypersonic emitting sound to scare off the mice, which to this day I'm not sure if it ever worked. There were all these staples of her apartment and of visiting her. And then slowly, until a point that it became quickly, she began to no longer be quite the person she was because she was also going through Alzheimer's dementia. And for me, a really seminal memory is cleaning out her apartment with my father and, going through that process together all the way through to the end when that apartment was bare. And I think that's a really good metaphor of the adjustment that I had to make
Mhm.
of feeling that a relationship with her that had been full was barren. And I can't say that I look back at that fondly. It was incredibly painful to lose somebody that I knew so well, um, and to have them eventually feel like someone different than who I had known. But I think this hooks back to your question to me. Um, it's actually the moments of change. We have this incredible drumbeat of repetition, and sometimes, hopefully, it's beautiful repetition of relational experiences. I think for people with trauma, it can be like being trapped in this consistent drumbeat of awful experiences. But we have this consistency until the moment that it's not that way. But ironically, it's those moments of change that give us the incredible opportunity, and it speaks to something we're going to really talk about later in the show, which is curiosity. Because when something changes, when one of those pictures on the background in your office change, and it's a striking difference, our whole association to the world changes. And while that can be jarring, it's also an opportunity for learning. And that's something I really wanted to share in response to your story.
You asked if I might respond to the question about being written out of the story that my father had maintained about who his eldest son was, what that was like for me. Well, it's a good segue for me to, first of all, answer your question and then respond to an important aspect of trance that we want to share with our listeners. I had lived in the family system that I grew up in a certain set of roles that had a certain set of responsibilities, that had a certain set of expectations. Some of those I was very, very aware of. Many of them I wasn't. And it was as the way that those roles and responsibilities and expectations began to shift because he couldn't maintain them anymore that I experienced a profound sense of disorientation. I literally wasn't sure where I was anymore because I was no longer in his life, in his story, in the way that I had been for quite a few years. So if I use that as a jumping off point, many of the people that Eric and I have worked with for many years are coming in with a desire for change without realizing how they're being held captive in what we call a negative trance state. And one of the elements of transitioning out of that is when we become a bit confused, uncertain, even disoriented, where the past no longer continues to make sense, even if it's painful sense. And in that moment of disorientation, in that period of confusion, of uncertainty, we begin to be able to consider new possibilities. And that is where the power of trance can really gain some traction to help people move into new possibilities, accessing their internal resources in ways that they have never done before. And we're going to be talking about that in relation to common mental health challenges, to common health challenges, whether it's cancer or chronic illness, such as digestive difficulties, migraine, pain problems in the body. We're going to talk about it in terms of relationships. We said before, like intimate marriage relationships or long-term partnerships, relationships within family systems, communities, your church, your faith community, political communities, national movements involving the fate of our planet. They're all relationship based. They're all carried forward through stories, and we're going to talk about how those stories are both trapping us and what are the steps we can take to liberate ourselves from those traps so that we're able, alone and together, to reach new levels of possibility that is frankly better for all of us.
And with that grand introduction, David, now perhaps doo-doo-doo, 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 we could take it back in time, back to the beginning of evolution, to the endowments that we have been bequeathed with, these incredible neurological, brain-based, body-based endowments that give us this capacity, but also potentially can shackle us in how we experience the world. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that biological, neurological underpinning that kind of
Okay.
contributes to how we experience the world and one another.
I will do my best with that. All of us, every one of you listening today, is blessed with a brain that has two sides. And it has two sides because each side of the brain has absolutely different functions. And it's not just human beings that have two sides to the brain. Frogs, fish, even certain insects have two sides to their brain. One is essentially the library, the collector of experience. It's where new learning gets stored, so it becomes the learning that we carry forward. The other side is where we learn what's new, what's uncertain, what's confusing, what's disorienting, so that it can become part of what we now know that we didn't know yesterday. So there's this constant moving forward between what we have lived, what we have known, what we believe is the case, and what we discover is outside of the range of our experience so that we can take in something new and continue to grow. It's when the collaboration, the relationship between the left and the right and the left, isn't working in an optimal way that we get stuck. Getting stuck in the past means we just continue to live out the past over and over and over again without any chance of it growing and being different. If we only live disconnected from the past, we're constantly adrift in a world where nothing looks familiar. It's always brand new. We're always being disoriented. So it's really this millions of years of working to create this connection, this relationship between what we have learned and what we don't know yet, that can become part of what we discover, that we're positioning ourselves to grow and be our fullest selves as individuals and as individuals within a variety of different relationships. Eric has a beautiful way of talking about that as connected to the role of curiosity, the role of curiosity as an important theme in this podcast. Eric, can you talk to us about your secret sauce, your special sauce of curiosity?
It's the special sauce of curiosity. And what are the ingredients in that special sauce? Curiosity is all about, and I'm going to go back to something you said, which is what we know now we didn't know yesterday. I think that's how you said it. Um, Curiosity is about being open to knowing what we didn't know that we actually knew. So it's a way in which things are constantly um, becoming anew, and the totality of our lived experiences, rather than restricting new experiences from unfolding, becomes a gateway. So it's like you want to just be in the world. You want to just experience the world. And it's that curiosity that allows you to just be captivated in ways that create new learning by something you didn't know was going to be important to you today when you sought out to learn yesterday. I'm just kind of playing with yesterday and today. And that's also a way of saying that people who are curious don't know who they're going to become tomorrow, because when you're learning, who you are is constantly being shaped and informed. And it's curiosity that underpins secure attachment. We'll talk more about that later. It's curiosity that I think is a bedrock of healthy relationships, because it ensures that people in relationship, whether with one another or with the wider world, um, are approaching one another with openness, or when that's not there, closedness, which is essentially a way of saying, well, I know what's going to happen out of our interaction. And right, then you can't evolve.
So, picking up on that, I'll give you an example from a couple that comes to mind. Tell me, listener, if this sounds familiar to you. This couple had pretty intense conflict with one another, which is what brought them into working with me. But they also had pretty intense desire for the relationship to be different. They hadn't abandoned hope that it could be different, but they were deeply stuck in ways that cut them off from being able to realize that hopeful potential. I remember giving them an exercise in which each was assigned the task of looking for the moments when what their partner was capable of doing when they were in a loving place actually got acted on. In other words, looking for the moments of love, looking for the moments of connection, looking for the moments of flexibility. When I saw them a few weeks later, I asked, what did you notice? They were both silent. And I asked, were you able to notice? And they both said, not really. We were more focused on just enjoying not doing the bad stuff that we have done. So I said, so you're focused on keeping the past from perpetuating itself? Yeah, it was nice to get a break from our constant arguing. And I asked, but is that helping you see what's possible here? Not yet. Not yet. Why? Because they were so oriented to either the memory of what had happened that hurt, or the fear that what has happened could recur, that they couldn't apply curiosity to what was already present. And just like a little sapling, just fragile, needing a little encouragement to grow, they couldn't focus on that. So, curiosity is the secret sauce that allows us to see what already exists, even if we haven't recognized it yet, because those are the stepping stones to build forward into positive possibilities. Hopefully, that's a useful example from my practice.
I love it. And if I was following your story the way that you intended, it sounds like your homework assignment broke the that repetitive quality of their negative interactions, but they weren't quite ready to be curious. What they were ready for was a break. And so there was something about your instruction that was saying you have permission to no longer do things the way you've been doing. But they were still trying to find the seedlings to take root of how to be with each other in this new way. Is that right?
I think that's exactly it. So, we're really talking about a series of stages moving from what has been
Hmm.
to not continuing what has been to allowing for the possibility of what can be, to seeing the possibility of what can be, to cultivating the possibility of what can be. And that is, in a nutshell, the process of transformative relationship. That's what Eric and I will be talking about throughout this podcast in lots of different ways.
And I have no idea what the timestamp is on our show right now. We've been at this for a while. This might break the record for the podcast with the longest amount of time that has passed without the hosts actually formally introducing themselves. And I don't know about you, David. I feel like in this discussion, we really have introduced ourselves to our listeners. But maybe this is a moment where it might make sense when we're sort of talking about that process of change that you just described to tell our listeners a little bit about ourselves with the recognition that just through this conversation, we're changing, and probably the way that we would introduce ourselves might be totally different after five episodes of Transforming Relationships. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'll pick up that gauntlet. I'm David Alter, Dr. David Alter, a psychologist, studied in Chicago, where I earned my doctorate degree. I have come into the field of psychology through my interest in brain science and neuroscience, looking for many years now at the connection, another word for relationship, between our brain, our mind, our body, and our social connections. My practice is all about helping people modify how those different intersections play out. I'm fascinated by how we as individuals exist in larger fields. I'm especially interested in our connection to nature, which is our original field. We co evolved with nature. Many of the things that help us are when we are in our best alignment with nature, and many of the things that hurt us are when we're working against nature and our nature. So I'll develop those themes more over time, but that's me, psychologist David Alter, coming to you as one of the hosts of this podcast. So, Eric, who are you?
Well, David, when I was listening to you talk about yourself, I was struck that I, like you, am really spellbound by the role of connection and the different ways that we make connections. I think my entry points into the field and the things that have grabbed me are somewhat different, but have led me to this same place with you. So my name is Dr. Eric Spiegel. I'm a psychologist like yourself, and um, one thing that we haven't introduced to our listeners yet is that, the way that we kind of came about this show is that we're colleagues of, I guess now over a decade together in the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. And we've had so many conversations over these years about trance, about relationship, about attachment. And, I think honestly, the best way to introduce myself is to say that my passion is this show. My passion is everything that this show encompasses. Um, for me, uh, going through my training in psychology, I was always captivated by this process of how the past informs the present, how early experiences shape the narratives that we create, that shape the types of relationships that we both consciously and subconsciously seek. But it wasn't really until I got the training in hypnosis that I think I began to discover a new layer to that. And I think it really started within myself. So, one of the things that struck me the most when I did my hypnosis training was just this incredible power of spoken word. Not just the things that were said as I learned about hypnosis, but also the way that they were said. That's what really captivated me. And I think, if I had to introduce myself, that would be the thing that has really guided my career is how attention, attachment, mirroring, this process of passing the baton back and forth, starting with childhood, but then going into kind of key adult relationships, might be with your partner, it might be with your therapist, how those experiences shape us. And I think an important last thing I'll say about myself is that it really expanded my realization of what's possible when we think about our relationship, not only with ourself, but with time. Why does past always have to inform the present? Why can't the present not inform the past? And playing with the word present, why can't the present also be a gift to the future, from the future, if we're imagining the person that we would like to become? So I think what hypnosis really did was make more malleable the process of change in relationship. And that's something I've been fascinated about my whole career and that I'm fascinated to explore with you on the show.
I am very excited as well about what Eric and I bring, where he and I overlap, where he and I don't overlap, because in a sense, it's a model for what we want to share with you. Growth is not necessarily about needing to become somebody new. That's a misnomer. The growth that we want to help you be able to achieve is, in a sense, about recycling what's already there, but in new and different ways. Your past is your past. Your present is this fleeting moment. Your future hasn't unfolded just yet. But by helping you learn to relate differently, to recycle different elements that you already possess of your lived story, out of that recycling, which Eric and I relate to as a transformative process, we're recycling what already exists and helping you realize the potential in new and different ways to be more of who you've already been, but don't yet know that. So that as you grab hold of these new possibilities, you begin the march toward your future, different than the future you thought you were locked into living toward. So
That's right.
we're really excited to help each of you learn how to take what you already possess, combine it in new and different ways, listen to the topics that Eric and I will bring out with each other. Listen to Eric and I as we interview some really fascinating guests from around the world who bring different perspectives on this process of this topic of relationship and the change process. We'll be doing that about twice a month. We'll have about 2 shows a month. And it wouldn't be a relationship-based show if we couldn't have a way of cultivating our relationship with you and your relationship with us. So, Eric, can you talk a little bit about how our audience can stay connected to us and help shape us?
Well, the first way is please share with us how you have been affected by this show today and by the shows that you're going to hear from us. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your feelings. Let us know your reactions. And that could also include ideas that you have for the show. You know, we have so many topics that we're excited to convey to you in the upcoming episodes. But we'd love to hear your ideas for show ideas. And so you can reach us at trance-forming relationships at gmail.com. That's TRANCEFORMING RELATIONSHIPS, transforming relationships at gmail.com. And you can connect with us on social media as well. I'm not going to get into all of those different hooks and handles, but just look for us. We're out there, and let us know how you've been shaped by the show and what you want to have us cover. We'd love to talk about it with you.
So whether you opt to follow us through an audio podcast or connect to us through the video version of this podcast, that's up to you. But regardless, it's a connection, it's a relationship, and we look to cultivating it to its fullest potential. Until next time, this is David Alter, Dr. David Alter signing off, and
Dr. Eric Spiegel saying goodbye until hello. We will see you next time.
bye-bye. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to catching up with you again in our next episode. A quick reminder, while we are both doctors of psychology, this podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, does not offer diagnoses, or engage you in actual treatment. The conversations, the opinions of our guests, and any information that we share here are meant for your general knowledge, your learning, your inspiration, and your motivation to put some of our ideas into practice in your day-to-day life. Remember that everybody's body and everybody's personal health journey is different, so what works for one person may not be right for the next or for you. If you have questions about your health, any psychological or medical condition, or any changes that you're thinking about making to your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise routine, your medications, or some other aspect of your life, it's always best to talk with a qualified healthcare professional who knows your personal history. Never ignore or delay professional advice because of something you heard here with us. We want you to enjoy the show and to walk away with useful insights, but ultimately, you are responsible for your own health decisions. Please use your best judgment, stay curious, and always listen to your body. Take care, be well. Bye-bye until next time.